Today's dead idea, the medieval Irish geis, a soul-binding personal rule that kills you. So think of it this way. Remember when you were kids and your sister jinxed you so you couldn't talk till your mom said it was okay? Well, it's kind of like that, except if you talk, you die. It is a jinx of doom. If somebody placed a geis on you, you have to follow it, or fate comes crashing down on you. For example, the hero Cuchulainn had a geis that he could not eat dog meat, but also had another one that he must accept any food offered to him. So when an old woman offered him dog meat, he could not refuse, and he met his fate soon after. It's a soul-binding personal rule that kills you. That's what we're talking about today on Dead Ideas. Hey, thanks for listening, everybody. The music we just heard was composed by Rachel Westhoff, my lovely wife, who has placed a geis on me that I cannot eat nothing but Cheez-Its and Dr. Pepper for dinner, or it will be my doom. I'm BT Newberg, but you can call me Brandon. With me today is my co-host for the day, Andre Solo.
What? Hey, everybody.
Hey, Andre. Thanks for being on the show again.
Glad to be here.
Do you have any geisha on you right now?
Not that I'm aware of, which is probably the most dangerous kind of geisha.
Oh, a secret geisha. You won't know what hit you.
Surprise! You broke your geisha.
Andre knows hellatons about traditional Irish culture. He is practically shitting clovers over here. So I thought he'd be a great co-host for this particular series. He was also our co-host for the ginormous Stone Circles series about Stonehenge, which was awesome. So it's great to have you on the show again.
I'm loving it. Glad to be here, man.
Yeah. A couple of things I want to get out of the way before we start. First of all, our cat just came into the room. So if you hear him, that is our cat, Mr. Fish. Second thing to get out of the way is the geis comes from Old Irish epic literature. And this episode's series is going to be correspondingly epic. We are going for a monster-length series this time. Andre and I found so much good stuff to talk about that we decided that we just had to do this right. In fact, we practically placed a geisha on ourselves to really do this one true
Just
to
to
its
bring it.
spirit. Yeah, to bring it.
If you don't like this episode, we actually die.
Yeah,
You guys have a lot of power right now.
Yeah. So please send in some good reviews, please. Okay. So, first of all, Andre and I are doing not 2, but 3 initial episodes. We usually do 2 series, but this time we're doing 3 episodes. And we're not done yet. After that, we are doing our first ever interviews. Yes, we have some really cool people to talk to about medieval Irish culture. First of all, we're going to be talking to Dr. Gillian Kenny of Trinity College in Dublin about women and magic in medieval Ireland. I'm really looking forward to that. We'll also be interviewing Finn Duar, host of the Irish History podcast, about the impact of the Vikings on medieval Irish culture. So those are both going to be really fun. Add in the Public Domain Theater 3000, and you have got yourself an epic length series here. It's going to be really cool.
You're going to need a lot of Guinness to get through this.
Yeah, buy a 6-pack at least.
At least.
Yeah. And not only that, we're still not done. We also have a custom created map for you, generously generated by listener Adam McKithern. Thank you, Adam. You are awesome. So with this map, which we'll post on our website, deadideas.net, and on our Facebook page, you can visualize the places that we're talking about. So definitely check that out. Okay. And last but not least, I also want to call attention to our Patreon page because, I don't know if you've been there or not, but if you go there, you will notice that for a substantial contribution, you can place one of these jinxes of doom on us. You can place a geis on one of us hosts on the show, like me, Andre, Nick, Anna, etc. Whatever you say when we're on the show, we have to follow your geis or risk our grim demise.
So it's an on-air geisha.
An on-air
when you're
geisha.
on air, you have to do this, or you can't do this.
For example, you can say that Brandon cannot say the word beer on air. Or,
That'll be a Cerveza episode.
Or you can guess Andre, so that every time he says our new president-elect's name, he has to also say, "Long live the king."
Ooh. I might just do that anyway.
Okay, so keep that in mind, listeners. You can place a geisha on us. All right, enough already. Let's get to it. Today we're talking about geisha and honor.
Yeah, and I think the first thing we should just throw out there, just to clarify for listeners, is you're going to hear a lot of words from Old Irish. We are doing our very best to pronounce them correctly, and that also means we're going to use the correct but weird plurals. So one single geis placed on you is a geis, but if you have more than one, they are geassa. So you'll hear us say geis and geassa, same thing, just geassa is plural.
Like Memoirs of a Geisa?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Which should be an even better book, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so this thing called geis comes from medieval Ireland. It comes from a deep pagan past, perhaps as far back as the Iron Age. Nobody's quite sure, but it doesn't get written down until later in the Christian era. So we're actually focusing on medieval Ireland in the 10th century, that's in the Christian era, when this stuff first gets written down. So we're focusing on the 10th century when we first hear of the geasa.
Right. And I think it is worth noting, and I'm sure we'll get into this, that a lot of the stories that were written down in that period that are these great epics and kind of, legends of ancient Ireland, although they were written in that period, the language they were written in implies that they were at least a few centuries older at the time they were written down.
That's right.
The spoken language they were writing down was older than what they spoke in the 10th century. So
yeah,
probably at least from the Dark Ages, maybe like the 600s, 700s, these stories would have been around. Earlier than that, maybe, but no one's exactly sure.
Yeah, generally reworking fragments from the 6th and 7th centuries.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so geasa. This is really weird. A soul-binding rule that kills you? What?
Kills you. Yeah.
What? Oh, so, I just left scratching my head. Okay, Andre, tell us, please. What is a geis? Give us the tweet.
The tweet.
Yes.
A geis is an injunction that is put upon you. It can either be positive or negative, meaning it could say you have to do this, or it could say you must never do this. And if it is put on you in the right way, by the right person, it is binding, and if you ever do it, you will literally lose your life shortly thereafter. If you ever break it, I should say.
If it's put on you by the right person?
Right.
So who's the right person?
Good question. So you get the sense, reading these stories, that it's not a casual thing. It's not like that your sister can just kind of, like you were saying with the Jinx.
Yeah.
Kids jinx each other all the time. Well, if kids were geishing each other all the time, there'd be a lot of dead kids.
Well, that does sound pretty medieval.
That's true. That's probably the reason for, scarlet fever. It beats the miasma theory. It's no better or worse than that.
That's good old-fashioned fun.
But you get the sense it has to be... First of all, it has to have some, meaning underneath it. Usually when you see someone in the Irish stories putting a geis in someone else, you can tell that it accords with their nature. So, for example, when a woman falls in love with a man, and she asks the man to run away with her so she won't have to marry someone she hates, and he says, no, I'm honor bound not to, there's clearly something in the stars written that they should be together. And at that point, if she says, I am putting a geis on you to take me away from this place, that's binding.
Uh-huh.
But if you just kind of think the guy is cute and you go up and say, geis, you gotta fuck me now, it's not going to cut it necessarily. You never see a casual geis in the stories. Yeah.
Now my plans for the weekend are ruined.
You thought you had the most powerful button to push in the world.
That was my ace in the hole. Okay, now, so this is probably going to be very unfamiliar for almost all of our listeners. Very few people have probably heard of this geis. If anything, a few of the gamers out there might have heard of it. There was a 5th level spell in Dungeons & Dragons called, you probably pronounced it
I love that you're
Geis.
not just referencing it, you're and it's a 5th level spell.
It's a 5th level spell. Yeah. And it, I think you put a command on somebody.
Right.
And if they don't follow your command, they take 5d10 psychic damage in the latest rules.
Right.
Yeah.
And the great thing about that is that in the game, you get, this is getting nerdier, you get a saving throw, which means that you might be able to shrug it off and not actually take the geis. But in quote-unquote real life, in the Irish stories, you had no option. If a geis was put on you, it was binding.
But let us hastily add, the medieval Irish probably weren't playing Dungeons & Dragons. So it's going to be a little bit different from that.
With like sheep's knuckle dice.
Yeah, right. Like a 20-sided sheep's knuckle.
So fun fact, there was actually a 20-sided die from ancient Roman times that was found
Really?
by archaeologists. Yeah.
Wow, a Roman D20.
It was a Roman D20. For those who are not gamers listening, that just means a die that has 20 sides. It's shaped almost like a circle because all the sides are so small. But they don't think it was used for gaming. They think that it was carved with different weird symbols that would have been used for telling the future. So depending on which of the 20 symbols you got when you rolled it, it would tell something about the omens of the future.
Sure,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is how I use my D20.
All of today's parlor games started out as divination.
Exactly. It's true.
Okay. So let's get back to Geis,
Right.
and let's get a little bit more of a sense of it, because these things come from stories, right? This comes from epic literature, heroic literature. So let's hear a teeny, tiny, little, short story with a geisha in it. You got something for us?
I have a little something. I will
Nice.
give you guys the abbreviated version as much as anything this epic can ever be abbreviated. But many of you listening may have, or may not have, heard of the hero Cuchulainn. And Cuchulainn is one of the two most famous warriors in Irish history. And so our story about this geis comes from Cuchulainn's both his childhood and then the end of his life. So to understand Cuchulainn, you have to realize that he started his warrior career young. He was 7 years old, which is too young to be girded as a warrior in ancient Ireland. He was playing hurling with his friends, which is like this cool game that's like a cross between hockey and soccer, basically. And he happened to overhear a rumor from some of them that a druid had said that if any young warrior takes his arms for the first time on this day, he will be greatly renowned through the ages. And that appeals to him greatly. So he throws down his hurling stick and walks straight to the High King and demands that the High King gird him as a warrior. And everyone, yeah, that was what he was known for. It's like chutzpah, you know. So he demands this, and everyone in the king's hall starts laughing. It's this kid. It's ridiculous. And they ask, well, why do you want to be girded as a warrior? And he says, because I heard that I will be renowned through the ages if I get girded today. And almost as a joke, they're like, oh, give him some weapons. That sounds great. Give him a sword, a shield, and a chariot. They want to see this kid like barely be able to lift this stuff and just laugh him out of the hall. So they give him a sword and a shield, and they formally gird him, and he immediately just breaks them. He smashes them to pieces and says to the High King of Ireland, he says, you give me this garbage? You call these weapons? Do you insult me by giving me substandard equipment?
What? Was this like the rusty sword you find at the beginning of like a computer RPG?
We don't know. It could have been. So the king actually gives him a better sword and shield. He does the same thing. He just destroys him. He says, no, you are insulting me. This is substandard. At this point, the hall is silent because he's insulting the king. And the king says, all right, you know what? Here's my personal sword. Here is my personal shield. My chariot awaits you in the courtyard. You are girded, young man. And everyone's like, what's this kid going to do now? He goes out, hops in the chariot, drives immediately to the borderlands, and just challenges this guy who's been raiding their kingdom to one-on-one combat, kills him.
I thought you were going to say he drove to the border so he could buy beer. Or
I'm old enough to buy... That's how it works in Ireland. If you're old enough to have a sword, you can buy alcohol.
So over the border you can.
When you cross over, right, exactly, yeah.
It's a different laws.
So basically, long story short, at the end of the day, he comes back with a bunch of heads that he's cut off of all this kingdom's enemies, and he throws them to the High King's feet and says, now are you happy you girded me today? And the High King said, I think that prophecy will be fulfilled. And sure enough, he goes on to become this great warrior. So
where's the geis part of it?
Oh, we're getting there.
Oh.
So at age 7, he's starting to become respected already as a warrior, and he gets invited, as all warriors do, to a giant drinking feast at another warrior's house. The other warrior is named Cuchulainn, and Cuchulainn is famous for being a great fighter, a great blacksmith, and having this really badass dog. This dog is known as like a monster that even the best warriors of Ireland cannot defeat this thing, so he uses it to guard his house. And when young Cuchulainn...
Do we have any idea what breed of dog it might have been?
Well, you could probably guess like an Irish hound, like an Irish wolfhound or whatever they're called, Irish deerhound, but maybe bigger than most and with like a fiery breath or something else suitably fantastic.
It has a breath weapon.
I would assume, yeah, or it has like spikes on it. There's literally fire-breathing sheep in one Irish legend, so it's not beyond the realm of...
realism was not big back
quote-unquote realism, yeah right. So anyway, so he sees this dog and he hears, oh, no warrior can beat this dog. And what do you think he does? Sure enough, he goes over and leaps on the dog, unarmed, and starts wrestling with it. And Cuchulainn waits until the dog tries to chomp a bite off of his hand, and he shoves his whole fist in the dog's mouth, and then just pops it out the back of his head and drops the dog dead on the ground.
That's gruesome.
It's pretty gruesome.
Oh,
and all the warriors there
R-rated.
cheer because this is so badass. Nobody could beat this dog. But Cullen, who owned the dog, does not cheer. He gets very upset. He says, what are you doing? That was one of the most valuable things that I owned. You're in my home drinking my ale, and you just destroyed the dog that I used to guard my door, that no other warriors is equal. Cuchulainn felt some remorse because there is a certain law of hospitality. He doesn't want to violate that trust.
But his name isn't Cuchulainn yet.
Yeah,
right?
true fact. So his name is not yet Cuchulainn. His name at this point is Shatanta, I think, was his
right.
birth name.
Yeah.
Much less famous version of his name.
Okay.
So little Shatanta, I should say. He feels bad. And he makes Cuchulainn a deal. He says, listen, you're right. I can't bring back the dog, but what I can do is give you my pledge that if your house is ever under threat of attack, I will come here and hold the door in the place of the dog. And that pleases Cuchulainn. He says, oh, yeah, that's a good deal. You beat the dog, you're more badass. I just upgraded my household guard. That sounds perfect. So he earned the nickname Cuchulainn, Cu meaning a dog or a hound, and Chulainn meaning of Cullen. So he's Cullen's dog, is what his name means. And with taking on that name, he also got the Geis, that you must never eat the flesh of a dog. Which sounds easy to us, but actually through much of the world, even today, dog is not an uncommon dish. My girlfriend has eaten dog, and in the old days, it was not uncommon. They would eat dog sometimes. So he had to be careful not to eat dog, and this was a geisha on him. And he managed to keep that his whole life, and he picked up other geisha, one of which, as you pointed out, was that he must never refuse food when it's offered to him, which would have been a violation of hospitality. So he had these two geasa on him. And eventually, after becoming very famous, saving Northern Ireland from this great army, all kinds of great deeds, he was on his way to another battle. And it was getting on toward evening, and he sees some smoke from a campfire. And he figures, well, I need somewhere to rest. Let's see who's over here. So he calls out that he's coming and says, who's there? And an old woman says, oh, it's nobody but an old woman. Come and join me by the campfire. He says, oh, that sounds great. So he plans to share the fire with her for the night. And she's cooking some stew in a pot. And he smells it. He says, oh, it smells really good. What are you cooking? And she says, why, it's otter meat. And otter, in Old Irish, the word for otter it literally means water dog or water hound.
Oh,
they considered otters to be like a canine species.
Okay.
So he knows immediately he cannot eat this. And he starts to open his mouth to object. But before he can do so, she says, won't you please have a bowl? So now he's caught. He's caught
because he also has the gesh where he can't refuse.
He can't refuse the food.
The food.
So it's which one do you want to break? Do you want to eat the food and break your geis about not eating dog? Or refuse the food and keep that geis, but now you are breaking the geis about not refusing food.
Right.
He is caught between two hard places, you could say. And so with no better choice to make, he figures, I'll at least get a full belly before I die. And he says, sure, give me a big bowl. And he grimly and glumly eats the meat. And she begins to cackle, and her face kind of changes. And he realizes, as it does, that she is not just any old woman. She is actually Morian, the goddess of death and war. And through all of his life, ever since insulting her at a young age, Cuchulainn has been kind of in conflict with the Morian. She's appeared many times to try to throw obstacles in his way. And now she has finally gotten him. She forced him to break his geis. And the next day, he went to combat, and he died. He was disemboweled, and he dragged himself to a standing stone and asked his charioteer, will you please tie me to this stone and tie my guts back in my stomach so that I may die standing up? Wow. And that is how Cuchulainn passed from this earth.
That is a badass story.
Yeah.
So that's from the Toyn.
That is
Toyn Boqualny.
It's the beginning part is the whole childhood stuff is one of the lead up stories to the Toyn, and then his death is actually a story that's is separate from the Toyn but part of the same cycle of stories.
Listeners, if you want to look this up yourself and find out more badass parts of the story, Toyn is actually spelled Tain.
Toyn.
Because if you've ever seen Irish, it's the most messed up spelled thing. There is actually an order to the chaos, but
right. It's like if you're trying to write Korean using the Greek alphabet.
Yeah. So there's a reason why, but still, it's pretty crazy spelling.
Right.
Okay, so what I want to know about that story, thank you for that, by the way. Okay, so is it Cuchulainn that actually placed the geis on Setanta when he got his name Cuchulainn?
Right.
Or who placed the geis and how?
So
that's what I don't get about this.
Right? So I have to just plead ignorance on this one. I'll just say off the bat, I don't distinctly remember without the text in front of me, and it's also possible that it's never clear. Because the Irish stories were often written down with a limited amount of vellum in the monasteries, and they would leave things out or cram things together. So it could just say, and he had a geis on him that he must never eat the meat of a dog.
Right.
It might not clearly say, and then so-and-so said... Yeah. But it might. I just don't remember offhand.
Okay. Yeah. I in all my research for this, I didn't find any clear indication of, like, do you call on a spirit of the other world
Right.
to place a geis, or do you have to be a special kind of person? Can you just anybody do it?
Yeah.
All that I couldn't find.
Yeah.
And
I think the answer is a little fluid, I suspect. But I will say that, so in part 3, in the 3rd episode in this series, we are going to give you a whole story. I'm going to recite an entire Irish story that hinges on a love story and a geis. And in that story, they do. Like, the woman actually says the words of how she puts a geis on the guy.
Oh.
And in the English translation, which take it for what it's worth, because it may not be exact to the Irish, but she says, I place druid bonds upon you.
Okay.
So when she's formally invoking that, like, what I'm about to say is being said as if it is druidic, as if I am a druid or as if there's druidic magic to it. That's kind of the implication.
Okay.
It's like, I place druid bonds upon you.
So at minimum, she's invoking the old ways.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Now, at this point, I want to just give a little, I don't want to round out the concept a little bit more with some more examples, because I found some really interesting ones. So when you read the epic heroic literature, it tends to focus especially on kings and heroes that have geisha on them.
Right.
But I found more than just that. So that was kind of fun.
Excellent.
Okay, we'll start with the kings and heroes, though. So, for example, it was geis for King Connor to go clockwise around his capital city. He couldn't. He could go the other way around, but he couldn't go clockwise around Terra.
Is this
capital.
the king from the destruction of the hostel?
Yes.
Okay, so I think it's Conora.
Conora.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a different
Conora.
king whose name is actually Conor, who's the king of Northern Ireland, but this guy's a high king.
Okay.
And I believe it's Conora.
Conora.
Yeah.
Okay. So Conora couldn't go clockwise around his capital city. Interesting one. It was also geis for any king of Terra to enter North Tethba on a Tuesday.
Right.
Which you can kind of, it sets your imagination going. You can kind of imagine maybe there was some kind of political context to that. Some of the geisha have this possible kind of practical aspect to them, but other ones are just baffling.
So actually, with the clockwise one, there is a reason for this. Clockwise is a big thing. Was it he's not allowed to go clockwise?
Sunwise is what they say.
Sunwise, which is the same thing as clockwise. Yeah. So in ancient Ireland, there was a lot of like etiquette stuff around your right hand, your left hand, clockwise, and anti-clockwise.
Okay.
And basically what it boils down to is if you are circling a place clockwise, what that means is that your weapon arm or shield, or your sword arm, is facing the place that you're circling. So what that's saying is that the king cannot encircle the capital as if he would attack it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, now I am glad that I had you on the show.
Yeah, and there's all kinds of rules. Like if you're on a chariot, you have your shield on one side, you joust off the other side. Like so, you have to go clockwise in certain situations, and it's always an attack. And yeah, all kinds of stuff. It's like a victory thing sometimes.
Oh, wow, that's awesome,
Yeah.
because it makes so much sense now. But
Right.
when I thought that was the perfect example of like a Monty Python one.
Right.
I mean, it's just absurd.
Right. Well, the Tuesday one might be
Yeah.
because I think that the place you mentioned is actually another name for Tara, which is the same like the High King's capital.
Yep.
And I don't know why it would be on a Tuesday. He can't enter it on a Tuesday. It might be some astrological stuff, like Tuesday is the
Maybe.
day of a certain deity. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or maybe that's when they have their farmer's market. He's
Oh,
not
wait.
supposed to spend too much on cabbage.
Isn't Tuesday, like, it's from, in Norse stuff, it's the god Tiw, who's like Mars, like the god of war.
Yeah.
So maybe no entering the capital on the god of war's day? If you're blending in, like, later medieval Saxony and Christiany stuff into it.
Or
know?
Viking stuff.
Viking stuff, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Which-
That's a guess.
That's possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Hero ones. Couple of, and these are some of the most metal ones that I found. Okay. This one here is definitely the most metal one. It was geis for Fothad Conaina. It was geis for him to drink ale without dead heads in his presence.
Yes. Oh, I want that. Okay, if anybody is going to do the Patreon support where you gauge us, that would be great. Remember, it only applies on air, so we can still drink beer in other situations, but we can't have ale without dead heads in our presence.
Oh, I don't know. I don't want to have to go looking for a dead head.
Well, you can't go one episode without ale.
I'll get really into scotch at that point.
Right.
Okay,
So
one
basically,
more.
he can only have beer if it was a victory celebration. It's
Yeah, pretty much.
He defeats an enemy, keeps his head, and now you can have a drink.
Perhaps.
Wow, I love
Perhaps.
it.
Perhaps. Okay, one more, and this is less badass, but really fun, I thought. It was geis for the hero Bres McElitha to pass Ogham, which was a kind of writing, Irish writing system. It was geis for him to pass Ogham without reading it.
So he had to not read it?
He had to read it.
He had to read it.
He could not pass it without reading it.
If you put up like a plaque or something in front of him, it doesn't matter what he's doing in the middle of the fight. He's like, oh, hold on, I gotta read this.
And guess how they defeat him?
Did they put a bunch of writing in his face?
They throw it onto his chest in the middle of like a sword duel or something.
And then while he's reading it, they stab him.
Yeah.
Oh. I think that really illustrates a nice aspect of how these are used in the literature is like they are used actively to like thwart people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that gives you a sense for like kings and heroes and warriors and stuff. But there's more to it. Lovers. Okay. You already mentioned one about how, you know, the woman who's like, the guy's honor bound not to go away with her, but she's like, I put a gesh on you.
Exactly.
So there's examples like that, but I'm going to not spell it out because we'll be hearing of it from your story.
We'll tell that whole story.
Episode 3. Okay. But that kind of stuff happens. And then there's some less romantic type of lover stuff. For example, King Fachtna, which already has a good name.
Right? Absolutely.
King Fachtna had a geis that he must sleep with the first woman encountered after a battle.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm sure that caused trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can just imagine, like, he's feeling good. He just came from a battle. He's, like, dripping with blood and sweat. And he's, like, sees this really hot, like, sheep herder or something lady on the hill. But then old Madam, like, O'Hara comes by and is like, hey, how are you doing? He's like, shit.
And this also gets into something about Irish culture. Like, it was a very sexist, like, patriarchal culture in the old days.
Yes, with asterisks, but yes.
Yes, I mean, people often think of the Irish or Celtic cultures as being like really like women friendly and women had equal rights. And what I always say is, ancient Ireland was the most sexist culture in the ancient world, except for all the other cultures in the ancient world. Like, it was just like a little bit better, like a little hair better for women. But yeah, if your geis was to, you know, take the first woman you see after a battle, there's nothing in there about who consents to it. You know, it's just first woman that you see.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the par for the course. Like,
and we're going to hear a lot more about that when we talk to Gillian Kenny. So,
Great.
Yeah, that was a really good way to explain that. I'm going to bring that up to her, if I remember.
Yeah.
Okay. What about for gamers? Geis for gamers. So there's a story where a woman named Bekuma places a geis on a man named Art that he must play fidchel with her for stakes.
Fikel.
Fidkel?
Fikel.
Fikel.
Yeah, which we'll also hear about in the story later. Fikel is oftentimes translated as chess. It is nothing like chess. It has nothing in common with chess. Not the pieces, not the board, not the rules, but it is an old board game that they would play in ancient Ireland. Fikel. Yeah.
And also, when they played, then the winner got to put a geis on the other person, too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and by the way, before we started recording today, kind of in the spirit of this one, I placed a geis on both of us, Andre and I, that we had to take a shot before doing it.
Yes.
So.
A shot of poachine, which is like Irish moonshine.
Yeah. How about geis for diners? There is a geis for many in the literature to never refuse a feast. For example, we heard about Cuchulainn. It was also geis for King Con to eat alone. He couldn't eat alone.
Interesting.
How about for poets? There was a story where a guy named Marbon is pissed off at his poets because their poetry wasn't good enough. So he puts a geis on them that they have to learn the entire Toyn, which is the epic that the story Andre told was.
He was like, I'm sick of this pulp fiction you guys are doing. Like, I want real literature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And he also further geised them that they could not sleep more than 2 nights in one place till they learned the entire thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they were like off on it. Like, they had to keep moving. They had to hustle
it. I figure it's like you have to wander around and talk to all the other poets and stuff in Ireland. And,
which is actually just a convenient way to get the poets out of your castle. You're like, and don't come back till you've learned it.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that'll be a couple of years.
Yeah. Okay, the last one here, and this is my favorite one. A geis against troublemakers. Yeah. This also comes from a story of Cuchulainn. So there was this kind of like, I don't know what the setup exactly. In my mind, it's like the classic frat party where somehow this guy Bricriu's house ends up tilted.
Oh, Bricriu, by the way, is a nasty character in Irish myth. He was a satire poet, which means he basically specializes in putting curses on people, and nobody liked him. He was just that jerk that you don't want to talk to, but he invited all these guys to his house, and you don't refuse an invitation. So yeah, they trashed his house, he got really upset. Go ahead.
Okay, so anyway, his house is literally tilted, right? Just imagine
off its foundation, on its side. Yeah.
Don't ask me how. It just happened that way. They
And
probably
houses
didn't remember
weren't
how
what
it happened either.
Yeah.
Anyway, he puts a geis on Caholen that he and his friends cannot eat or drink until they put his house back the way it was. So it's like, clean up after yourself. So that gives a little bit more flavor and rounding out to this concept of the geis.
So what do you think would happen with the lower classes? Because these are all, like, people who are high, like, upper class.
Yeah.
Like, if you're just, like, a regular pub owner and, like, a couple guys come in and they get too drunk and they trash your bar, do you think you could stand up at the bar and just be like, I put a geis upon you. You shall not eat until you've cleaned up this pub.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you, because
Right.
I'm trying to imagine, okay, all of this, we get this through, like, the heroic literature,
Right.
And it has this kind of dramatic effect on the story,
Right, yeah.
right? It brings about a tragic ending.
Yeah.
But I want to know, like, did this really happen in real life for the average person? Yeah, the little pub owner? I don't know.
So I can only speculate. I love this question because I think about this a lot. Like, like I lay awake at night, like I wonder. But I mean, I have some speculation. I think that first of all, we have to acknowledge that the geis is whatever else it may have been. It's definitely a literary convention.
Okay.
It is a device used by the sagas to create dramatic conflict where you know that this person will eventually be like hoist by their own petard, so to speak. Like the fact that they have a geis probably means that eventually they'll break it and die.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Doesn't always work that way. There are some people who survived having a geis, but usually that's the setup, you know? So it has this literary use, so it's hard to say how much it even was believed in the real world, even among like warriors.
The thing about the literary thing, though, what's funny, to me at least, and this clearly relies upon modern literary sensibilities when I say this,
Right.
but I would think if you were going to use it as a literary device, you would follow Hitchcock's advice, where if you show a gun in the first act, it must be fired by the third, and you use it to build that tension.
Yeah.
But in fact, how it often comes out in the literature is you don't even hear about the geis until the person breaks it,
Right.
and it just says, oh, and that was geis for him.
Right. And that, I think, might also be a product of how the stories were written down in the monasteries.
Possibly,
I think
yes.
if because it came from an oral tradition.
Okay.
And I think if the poets were reciting it at a feast, there probably would be better dramatic flow, and they'd set things up if they know they're going to use the death story later.
Sure.
Whereas in the monastery, they're often taking bits and pieces of what they've heard and trying to cram it together. Or there's not a good, like, whoever's writing it is just recording things, and they do it out of order. So when they get to the point where the guy dies, they're like, oh yeah, we never mentioned earlier, so I'll just mention now that was his geis, you know?
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
Also, when you're writing on vellum, there's no, like, going back and editing.
No.
Like, there's no copy
No
and
undo.
paste, no insert.
Right, yeah.
There's no undo. Yeah,
Right.
So you're like,
that's
whoops.
the first thing I would say is that it's definitely a literary thing. I personally do suspect that it had some basis in something people believed in the real world as well. And if I had to just guess, this is speculation, I would say that among the upper classes, it might be taken as like a matter of honor. And I think it probably was rare because I think that most people would kind of scoff at the idea of a geis. But I also think that if somebody had the audacity to actually stand up and say it in that formal, like, I'm binding druidic words upon you, if they said that in the middle of an upper class gathering, a feasting hall or something, and it sounded like confident and true, I suspect there would have been that moment where everyone's like, oh shit, you know, just like, what? They just, rah! You know, like, it would have been that moment where something, and I think it would have been taken, like, kind of seriously. But I don't know how often that actually happened.
Right.
And then the other thing I would say is that for the common classes, like for people who are peasants or farmers or pub owners or shoemakers, I suspect that they might have believed in it because it's the medieval world and there's a lot of crazy stuff people believe in.
Yeah.
But they might have just seen it as like one of those things that's for aristocrats. Like you hear about it in the great stories about warriors, and you just kind of treat it as like, well, that's their thing. That's not our thing.
It might have meant something important to them, but it was part of their values, but not necessarily part of their daily life.
Exactly.
Which is,
So like if a soldier was traveling through their town and they heard this guy has a geis on him and he has to do this, they'd be like, oh, wow. And they might take that seriously, but it's unlikely that the shepherd is turning to his wife and saying, I geis you to clean up after this, whatever it is.
Kind of in the same way that, like, the average person might never, ever run into someone who actually practices magic, but they know and believe about magic.
Oh, that's a really good analog. You, in the medieval world, you might have believed in witchcraft or some kind of magic, but you probably didn't know anybody who you're like, oh, that guy totally does it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to give a counterpoint to that too.
Okay.
I think what I just said is probably the most likely. It's the most conservative. It's like, well, we probably didn't have a lot of people running around all across all levels of society throwing geis on each other. But I will give a counterpoint, which is that in Vedic tradition in India, and this is by no means, I'm not saying they're the same thing. There's some common origins between Celtic stuff and Indian stuff, but they're very different traditions.
Yeah.
But they do have a similar idea, which is that if somebody is, it's a little bit more spiritual sounding, but if somebody is truly knows their inner essence, like who they truly are, and they speak from that place, then their words have this binding and almost magical effect because they're speaking their truth. And the interesting thing about that is that there are stories of people of all castes of society in India doing that. And there's even a story about one town that was saved from a flood because the river was bursting its banks, and a woman who was a prostitute was so in tune with like what her true inner nature was, that even though she was the lowest social caste, when she went out and intoned to the river like, you must go back into your banks, the river quelled and like receded and the flood was over and she saved the city. You know, so in that case, in a very different cultural context, this idea that like words can have this power that comes from your inner nature, even a commoner could do it if they truly expressed it that way.
Sure.
Maybe the Irish had a similar sense that if a shepherd stepped up and said with all the might of his soul, a geis that everyone could see, like, this is serious. This is something that reflects his inner nature. This reflects, like, the grand cosmic truth behind the situation. Maybe they were taking it seriously. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Or maybe it would just be like, oh, there goes old Farmer O'Doul who has a geis against peeing standing up. No, it was a
right. Well, you know, they do have a very strong tradition in the Irish literature of, like, I'm going to use a southern phrase, the shit disturber character. Like, the character who just goes around just messing with everybody else's shit, you know? And there's often this, like, peasant character, sometimes it's a giant, but this, like, very crude of manner, like, low-born, rough-mannered character who will intrude on an upper-class feasting hall or some kind of upper-class thing and mess up all the social conventions and then do something really important that, like, you know, sets the stage for a story or something like that. So I think in that role, if it's like you are sort of, I could see a geis being like a means of like social change, where it's like, we don't have any power to go and change what the king says, but if a peasant travels from their town to the king's hall and walks in the hall and throws down like the last of his drought-stricken sheep on the ground, its corpse, and says to the king, I put a geis on you to help these people from this drought, I would imagine the hall is going to go quiet and the king would have to do something about that. He can't just shrug it off and say, oh, a peasant, you know, because everyone's going to be like, you'll die if you don't do that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but stuff like that, even dealing with peasants, when it came to the honor of hospitality, that was taken really seriously back then, to the point that a form of protest that a non-noble could do would be to go to the lord or king's hall and fast, right? Outside,
like on the step,
on the stoop outside, and but not take any food, and that would be such an insult. Not insult. It would dishonor the host. Because they're
failing to provide for someone on their property.
To provide the hospitality that is due to any traveler, right? That would effectively socially shame that higher up person into acting. Yeah.
And this was such a core idea in Irish culture that even into the much more recent struggle between Ireland and England in the late 1800s and early 1900s, people would do starvation protests in British prisons. Irish people would refuse to eat the food, and a number of the protesters died in prison because the British figured, well, eventually you'll get hungry. They didn't understand the cultural depth behind it, that they're not going to give up on the fast. And meanwhile, the Irish actually expected that we'll shame them so much they'll have to do something, and the British had no cultural framework for that. They were like, why would we change the law because you refuse to eat? So protesters died, and then later the British would try force feeding them, and it became this very gruesome, kind of two cultures, another layer of the way the two cultures collided. So it's a very enduring thing in Irish culture.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so here's the other thing that I want to know. So I was thinking before this episode, I was like, I wanted to place a geis on you on air, but I realized anything that I thought of that I wanted to put on you was like, no, that would be such a dick move. Okay. I'll tell you in a second the geis that I thought of. But there's no way I could put it on you because it's such a dick move. So I want to know, how could you actually have done this back then? What motivated a person to put a geis on someone back then? So, you want to hear the geis that I thought of for you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I thought of a lot of dumb ones first. But then I thought of your name. Andre's solo,
Great.
right?
Oh, okay.
So
yeah.
I thought, what if I placed a geisha on you that you had to spend every seventh night alone? But in proper dramatic style, you would also have a second geisha on you that you could never refuse a booty call.
Oh wow, that would definitely change my life.
Yeah. I don't know what your girlfriend would think about that. But...
Exactly. Wow, but that would be a great combination for like a modern day folk story, so to speak. That'd be really fun, actually. Wow.
Okay, so that would be a total dick move if I actually did that to you, but in the stories at least, people actually do that.
Right.
So,
Right. Wow. Yeah, good question. The solo one is really interesting because just like Cuchulainn is not Cuchulainn's real name, and the Geis kind of comes with the name.
Mm-hmm.
So I could almost picture, like, when I first took, because solo is a pseudonym, you know?
Uh-huh.
When I first took that pseudonym, I could picture someone, I mean, not really, because who goes around putting Geis on people, but I could picture that being like, well, if you're going to take the name, you got to take the Geis that goes with it, you know? I don't know where the booty call would come from, but that would not be out of keeping, though, with Irish geassa.
Sure. As we heard from that King Foxla, or whatever his name was, yeah.
I mean, I think from the examples we've heard in the stories, I really do get the sense that there has to be something that, I guess the way I look at it is that a Geis has to, it reflects something about who you really are. It reflects something about either who you are on the inside, or about your inner nature, your essence, or about like what you are meant to do in life. Because early Irish like cosmology and in the stories, there's a strong sense of not fate exactly, but the idea that everyone has a purpose, you know?
Okay.
And there's a whole bunch of, I could go for hours about that, which I won't, but that's a very strong like idea. That the sort of your art that you practice and your purpose in life and sort of your moral virtues, they're all kind of packaged together as like this like person that you should move toward being, or this thing that you should be doing. And in fact, even the word for career in the Irish language to this day is a very dramatic phrase. It doesn't mean career or job. It means your way of life, you know? That's much bigger than like the job you work. Right. You know, it's like your family and everything else. Yeah. So, I think that a Geis always on some level reflects who that person is or is meant to be. Okay. So if it's two lovers running away, it's because, yes, even though you're honor bound to not run away with me and I'm honor bound to marry this other guy, we know that the stars are crossed and that we are soulmates. So it would be appropriate for the Geis to take us away. Or if it's these warriors, like, you know...
it reinforces values,
It does, yeah. Personal values and societal values. Yeah. A lot of those warrior geissa are about hospitality. And, like, you will refuse a feast, you won't refuse a feast, you can only have a feast if you're also doing this.
And a lot of them are also about honor.
Yes.
Right? Okay, so I want to make a transition at this point.
Let's do it.
So we've been going on and it's just dripping with awesome stuff here. So normally what we do in the first episode is we drop in to the actual like time and place and describe the time and place that we're talking about. But for this episode, I think we're gonna push that off to the next episode. We'll do that at the beginning of the next episode. I want to hear about honor, and this will actually kind of maybe even work better because what you're going to tell us about honor is going to kind of start back in the Iron Age almost, and then you're going to work your way toward the medieval period, right?
Exactly.
So we'll talk about honor and how this whole honor culture developed, and then that'll set us up for the beginning of the next episode. We can pick up the timeline from there and talk about medieval Ireland. Sound good?
Great. Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
What do you got?
So here's what I got. So honor and loyalty are probably the biggest values that run through all of Irish literature and like early Irish culture. And it starts long before there even was like in Ireland, the way we think of it as like a kind of Celtic rooted place. So on mainland Europe, and I'm just going to disclaim, I am not a historian.
I am an expert, by the way. You can believe anything I say.
Anything Brendan says.
Anything Andre says, just
questionable,
but go to me.
Yeah. Exactly. So basically, if you go back before there were Celts, there were these civilizations in what's now like France and Germany and Switzerland and Europe, which were very hierarchical. And generally the hierarchy was that there was a very small caste of warriors, and it was a hereditary thing. If you were in a warrior family, you'd be trained in weapons from a young age, and that was all you did. You didn't farm. You might own land and have people farming it, but you didn't farm. There's also a very small caste of like priests of some kind, and then almost everybody else was a farmer. And the farmers raised food for everybody, and the warriors protected everybody, and the priests did priest stuff for everybody. And that was the hierarchy. It was very rigid. And what that meant is that farmers didn't fight and fighters didn't farm. And that affected how war was fought.
Later.
It's
Okay.
very different from later.
Okay.
Yeah. So when one of these tribes, and a tribe might be 3,000 people, 5,000, maybe a big tribe would be 10,000. These weren't giant countries.
So
right?
what, if we could put a number to it, what era are we talking about? Like,
Oh,
isn't
gosh.
it BCEs now?
Is it just before the Hallstatt cultures? Oh yeah, it's in the
So
BC.
BC,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So
All
this
right,
is
so
like
back
the
then.
very early Iron Age. So what would that be?
Okay.
500 BC,
Something
maybe
like that,
something like
yeah.
that. So these tribes, when they came into conflict, it was very formalized because nobody had a lot of warriors.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Right.
so you would like send a
population,
message
yeah.
that's like, we're angry for you for moving into this area and taking this, and if you don't give us this back, we're going to come fight you. And then they send you a message back that says, yeah, come fight us. You know, and you almost schedule it. You know, you know when you're coming toward each other, you know when the fight's going to happen, and there would be all of these precautions taken to try to avoid actually having a battle.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
The first thing they would do is play loud instruments. And I mean like horns you could hear 7 miles away. Gigantic bronze horns. Drums, you know, that take 2 people to play. There's an instrument that's not a bagpipe, but it was like the precursor to a bagpipe.
Okay.
Where you had to do circular breathing to keep the droning sound going. So this unearthly wailing, and you would have this music coming from far away so they know you're badass. And you start to get closer. If the other side still isn't scared from how great your music is, you would then send out your priests. And your priests would go like line up, and they would basically have a slam poetry battle. Where they would just take turns just like dissing each other's mother, you know, and just like calling down the gods on each other and talking about what curs you guys are. And maybe one of the priests would just rip the other one apart so bad that it would be like, oh! And they're like, well, we clearly lost. Like the gods are with them, their priest is better in magic, like we lost. And one side might on the spot offer terms because their priest got dissed, you know. Now, if that didn't work, the next thing they're doing is they're doing animal sacrifice through this whole thing. Like they're trying to read the omens, and if the omens say you're going to lose if you fight this battle, they might say, oh, we should offer terms.
Okay.
The next step is that they send out just one guy each. You know,
They're
so you have a
champions.
champion from each side, and those 2 guys fight. And it's same with the priest. If one of these guys is so much better than the other that he just butches him, then you've only lost one guy. And you don't have to fight. You can just say, like, your guy's more badass than our guy. Let's just call it a day. We'll talk terms. If all of that fails, then your armies might clash. Meaning all 30 guys from this side and all 24 guys from that side race in and fight.
Army with air quotes.
Army, yeah. That's their army. And they're really good warriors. They've been trained their whole lives. They do nothing but train at sword and spear. But there are only like 30 of them, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 50 if you're a huge tribe.
Okay.
And that was how war was fought. So if you had a battle that went badly and you lose 10 warriors, that is devastating to your tribe. And it leaves you for a generation, you know, hobbled. Right?
Yeah.
So that was how it was. And then eventually there was this discovery, this military breakthrough. Someone invented the most powerful military secret in the ancient world at this time. Because at some point, we don't know which tribe, we don't know the name of them, but at some point, a tribe got word that like, hey, we're angry you stole our sheep, and we're sending our guys. And they're like, oh, God, I mean, we're down to like 16 warriors, and that tribe has like 45 of them, and they're just going to roll over us. What are we going to do? And somebody said, I have a plan. And he went to the farmers.
I hope this is another nerd wins moment.
It's like kind of it is, yeah. He goes to the farmers and he's like, listen, guys, I know that none of you are ever supposed to fight. And our whole deal as warriors, the whole reason you feed us is so that we go fight and you don't have to get, you know, sorted. But I have a proposal for you. What if we bring all of you, volunteers, anybody who wants to, you come with us. We're going to give you spears. I know you're not good at using them, but we're going to give you all spears. And if we can beat these guys, we're going to give you a share of the gold. And the farmers, probably a lot of them were like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, you're supposed to do that. But a lot of them said, yeah, I would like some gold. I'll give it a shot. So they gave them, I don't know, sharpened sticks. I didn't even know if they had enough bronze to like make bronze spear tips for all these guys.
Bronze or iron?
Oh, well, they still use bronze for the spear tips, even Iron Age. Yeah.
Sure.
So you know the battle starts. From over the hills, you hear the horns and the droning of these pipes and the pounding of the drums, and the other side's droning of pipes and pounding of drums. And like, okay, well, they sound like a big army, but let's go. And there's this big army of like 45 guys from the tribe that has the big army of warriors. I can just picture them like hearing only a few drums and a few horns and thinking this is a joke. We're going to roll over these guys. And they get ready with their priests and they get ready with their champion. Like, we're going to do this. and they see spears start to come over the hilltop, and there's 5 spears, and there's 10 spears, like, yeah, here we go, that's their whole army. And 10 more come, they're like, oh, okay, there are a few more guys than we thought. And then 10 more spears come, and then 10 more, and then 10 more. And the next thing you know, there's 200 spears coming over the hill. And at that moment, they were fucked. And this army of peasants, with like 5 warriors leading them, rolled over these guys, butchered the priest, butchered the champion, smashed the chariots, rolled over them, pushed back into their tribal land, took everything they had, split up the gold, and the farmers went home with little gold and went back to farming. And that was a change in like European history. That was the beginning of the warband. And through the rest of the Iron Age and into the Celtic period.
Now, just to clarify, what we're talking about is this must have happened at some point.
It must
wasn't
have.
like
This
this
is
was
not
recorded.
Yeah. We know that there were these hierarchical societies that didn't use large warbands earlier, and then we know that there was a period where warbands suddenly started happening.
So that was our movie that's based on a true story.
Quote-unquote based on a true story, It's based on an implied story. Right. Okay. But it's all like, speculation, but it's at some point they went from no warbands to big warbands. So... into the Celtic period, where they did have, and now we know, it's documented, they had warbands, which would be hundreds of people, and some of them would be trained warriors, but there'd be a lot of guys who were just along for like, you're a teenage guy, and maybe for 3 years you go join the warband and fight and travel, and if you don't die, you come back with some money and you start your family on your farm, And this is where the loyalty thing became so big. Because in a warband, where you have a couple hundred guys on this side fighting against a couple hundred guys on that side, everybody has to have like the same equipment, like a shield in your left arm and a spear in your right hand. And if you have money, you have a sword to draw if it comes to it. But it was basically spear and shield. And the thing about fighting in a line like this is that your spear is for you. Your spear is you get to stab whoever is in your face. But your shield is not just for you. Your shield is for the guy to your left. You are keeping him covered
I see
while
where
he
this
fights.
is going.
Right. And so in this setup, if you turn coward, you're afraid to fight, and you turn your back and run, it is not just your own life you're risking. You killed the guy next to you. If we're fighting next to each other and I turn and run, you die. And then when you die, the guy next to you is exposed. And then the next guy's exposed. So a whole line can fail if one person turns and runs. And so this is where the warband and this like culture of loyalty became so big. Your only job, if you join a warband, is to follow orders and to keep your word. You come here and you promise loyalty to the commander and promise that you'll never turn and run. You'll always fight if ordered to fight. And if you do those 2 things, you get a cut of the gold, you're respected, everything else. And if you fail in either one of those things, there's disaster for all of your friends. And that is how the early Celts fought. That is how the early Irish fought. And that even long after they stopped using warbands, even in the medieval era where they had like much more complicated weapons and armies, that ethos of like your honor, your loyalty is not just about you, it's about keeping everybody around you alive. That sticks. So that ethos runs through all of Irish culture till the medieval period.
Wow, that was really explained amazingly well. That was awesome. I can like feel it.
50% speculation and 50% history, and it's like, but somehow in that early period, that's how a warband came together, and
I'm holding my shield up partially in front of Andre right now.
Yes, I feel protected.
Yes,
I'm going to spear some people.
We're totally broing out with our shields. Loyalty all the way. So now, to cap this episode off. Okay, honor, loyalty, got it, right? What does that have to do with geisha?
I think it's 2 things. I think, and again, this is just off the top of my head.
And it's wild speculation, right?
Wild speculation.
Yeah. Full disclosure. We'll be wildly speculating a lot in this series.
The real answer is get in a time machine and go ask some of these guys, But my speculation would be 2 things. The first thing is the geas reflects social values made into a ritual. And so it's not just good enough to talk about honor and like, oh, well, we've been in a few battles with you at our side and we know you didn't run. This is a very formal way of like putting this like obscure, sometimes weird rule on you. And obviously, since it's a literary thing and it's a cultural creation, you probably would not actually die if you broke your gaze. But you could just imagine like the weight of, you would essentially for all purposes be dead. Like if we're a group of warriors and we all know that your geis is to never, to never drink beer unless there's a dead head in your presence. And we're sitting around an alehouse and someone is off serving beer and you just give in and say, you know what, I'll have a pint.
At that point, you don't know if you can trust your word
anymore. We don't know if we can trust you at all. Exactly. Is you
Yeah.
have broken this ritual thing.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there could be, you could, for all I know, you'd become an outcast, or we would expect you to die, so we just wouldn't cover your ass that much
Yeah.
for the next battle. So you might end up getting killed,
Yeah.
just the way that psychological stuff works.
So that makes sense. It's kind of like it's a way of demonstrating on a daily basis, even in peacetime,
Yes.
that you are a person you can count on
Right.
to keep to your word and your
Exactly.
principles.
And you almost get the sense that even just having a geas would mean that you're kind of somebody special. You know, like there could be, 50 warriors in your warband or a couple hundred, and there might only be that one guy who's got a geas, and that would be like, well, he obviously went out of his way to get that. He must have done some great feat or taken on some special crazy title or made some great oath or something that resulted in this geas. So already you're kind of distinguishing yourself as like, I'm willing to go the extra mile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's a big part of it. And then the other part of it, I think, is even if there never was a formal concept of a geas, I think, which there was, but even if there had never been, I think that the concept of loyalty and keeping your word is so strong in Irish stories that you wouldn't want to live if you broke your word. And there are numerous cases with no geas involved, but numerous cases in the stories where a warrior has a very clear choice that if you go here, you know it's a trap, you know you will be killed, and they still choose to go there. Yep. I mean, that's maybe the resounding theme of like Irish literature is like, it's better to honorably go to your death than it is to live. It's better to lose in honor than to win without honor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So that's my guess as to kind of the role it played and how it connects to honor.
That's awesome. Well, I think it's time to draw this episode to a close, but we are going to be back for way more next week. So everybody, stay tuned for that. Next week, we'll be talking about social structure
yes.
in Ireland, which may sound boring, but we found so much awesome stuff.
It's a weirder place than you guys expect.
So it's way different than
yes.
your average stereotype of the medieval society, where
yes.
there's basically lords, knights, and a bunch of peasants living in houses made of shit.
Although they did have that.
which probably is not even true of any of the medieval societies. But anyway, the point is, it's
I regret to tell
different.
you that the shit-based houses is a real thing.
Is it really?
Actually use dung as part of the mortar, part of the daubs you go on their walls. But
yeah. Okay, so we will talk about that next time. So stay tuned for that. Andre, I believe you have a product that you probably want to plug.
Yeah, if anybody out there, if any of the following things are true: A, you love to color in beautiful coloring books. B, you have someone in your life who loves to color and you want to get them a gift. Or C, you just love good stories.
Or D, someone has placed a geisha on you to color this.
You must color. If you like coloring books or someone you know does, my girlfriend and I just created the first coloring book with an introvert theme. It is called Introvert Dreams. It has a story told in pictures and words of a journey into an inner dream world. Introvert Dreams is available at Amazon.com.
And that girlfriend would be the brilliant and talented Jen Grenneman.
Jen Grenneman,
yes.
the creator of Introvert Dear, one of the largest websites for introverts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, awesome. Everybody listening, thank you. If you like this show, please tell us. If you have questions or corrections, please write us in. We'll only lightly gaze you if we are upset by your comments. Do you have a dead idea that you'd like us to explore? If so, we want to hear about it. So please write us in at deadideaspod@gmail.com. Or you can find us on social media at deadideaspod. Or go to our website at deadideas.net. All right, I think that's it for this time. Thanks, everybody. I'm BT Newberg, and this is Dead Ideas.